Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Leapwork's webinar. We are going to get started in just a moment. I am here with all of our presenters today, and we are thankful and grateful to have you all here. Happy Thursday, and welcome to today's webinar. We will get started in just a moment. I'm Janelle Udania, and I am here with Genevieve Lorient, our Senior Field and Channel Marketing Manager, Suna Ensi, our Field Chief Technology Officer, Alexander Koptil, our Manager of Channel Sales Engineering, and Tyler Mello, our Coffee Educator from Lucky Goat Coffee. And we will get started in just a moment. And while we are waiting for everyone to join, we are going to keep today's session interactive. So I will launch our first poll question. And that is, what city are you all joining us from today? We have people joining all over the globe. It's fun to see where everyone is joining from. And feel free to type into the chat, the poll, where you all are joining us from today. We've got London, Amsterdam, Germany, Atlanta, Bielefeld, Leamington, Stockholm, Copenhagen, Sloan, Milton, Georgia, Ames, Streisand. I am probably mispronouncing a lot of these names. I am based in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, everyone. And we are going to get kicked off in just a moment. And while we are waiting for everyone to join, I'm going to launch our second poll question, and that is, what is your favorite way to make coffee? Some of you might do drip, others might do espresso. So feel free to type into the chat your favorite way to make coffee. French press, coffee shop, AeroPress. Filter, French. Wow. Favorite coffee, a latte macchiato. That sounds delicious. Wonderful. We do want to keep today's session interactive. Appreciate everyone responding to our poll questions as we get started. Fantastic. Well, we will get underway now. Hello, everyone. We are thankful and grateful to have you all here with us today. We want to keep today's session interactive, and we will have some polling questions all throughout today's session. And now we will get underway with our Brewing Perfection AI-powered test automation for Microsoft's One version era. Thanks for your time, and we look forward to an amazing and interactive session. Please use the Q&A tab for questions or type them into the chat. And now I would like to introduce today's speakers. Suna Ensi, our Field Chief Technology Officer at Leapwork, Alexandra Koptil, Manager of Channel Sales Engineering at Leapwork, and Tyler Mello, our coffee educator with Lucky Goat Coffee. And now I will hand things off to Suna Ensi for today's presentation.
Thank you,
Suna,
Janelle.
over to you.
Thanks, and great great to be here today, and great to see so many of you joining us for this conversation on coffee and some testing on the side. So let's get started with that right away, talking about test automation in Dynamics 365, of course, implicitly when we talk Microsoft's One version. Yeah, we already hinted at the great crew here today. Myself, the Field's Chief Technology Officer here with Leapwork, been with the company since 2018, have a background in enterprise architecture, business process management, and development, and basically anything that has to do with business architecture and coherent business processes has been sort of a trademark of what I've been spending my work life on. And it's a beautiful segue into what Leapwork is all about, which is, of course, to ensure that all of your business processes are working. Your customers can enjoy great cups of coffee after ordering them online, etc., etc. All of those things. That's what we're all about, to help you make sure that your business processes, your customer journeys, your user experience is where it needs to be. I'm joined today by Alex and by Tyler, and they will introduce themselves when we get to that part of the show. So let's get started talking about one version. It's already here, just to be clear on that. For those of you already on Dynamics and Dynamics 365, you are, of course, already fully aware that we have one version with us. I think the key takeaway for us today is not talking about one version. What is it? How does it work? I think from your perspective, it's really a conversation of making it, crisply clear that yes, it's innovation on tap. Each one version upgrade, those 4 quarterly ones, brings new great capabilities, features, functionalities running in the cloud, especially if you're looking forward to all of those great new things coming in on the AI side. It's cloud only. That's the only way to reach them, and only way to utilize them fully is to make sure that your Dynamics instance is running latest and greatest. So that's why those quarterly updates in one version are so crucially important, not just from the business perspective side of things, but certainly also when it comes to business enabling and accelerating capabilities. So now we have 4 events. You already probably know that you can skip 2 of them, so you can scrape away with 2. But again, each new batch consists new business value, so you should probably do whatever you can to grab all 4 of them when they arrive. But then on the top of the line, you can also see what is called the quality updates, the PQUs. Now these happen every month, and these are unmutable, unskippable. They will arrive in your production environment on a monthly basis, containing crucial security patches and much, much more. So if you boil that down, that translates into potentially up to 16 transformative events, if we put it lightly, or maybe even disruptive events into your production environment on a yearly basis when running Dynamics 365. Now, I may be sort of shedding a stint of doom. That is not my purpose. I want to go back to the innovation on tap thing. This is actually bringing you great new stuff on a yearly basis. But of course, there is a cost. There is a thing to be mindful of when we navigate this, which of course is testing. Specifically regression testing. Not going too much into the gory details here. Let's just put it this way. For those of you joining us here today, working manually, the top one, test all, is probably not on the plate, simply because of the simple fact that you don't have the time. It's not feasible in any way at all to get to that particular point. It might be a slightly joyous dream for you to have, but it's not feasible simply working manually from the fact alone that you have up to 16 events to cater for full business regression test 16 years a day. Then you would simply not be doing anything else. So then mostly of you guys find yourself prioritizing, taking the most crucial ones, the ones that you think, right, if this is working, then I'm probably okay, safe. And then you make some bets along the way, looking into what is the risk picture coming in from each of these releases, painstakingly reading through the documentation of what's arriving, etc., etc. So then you can have some approaches to this, and you can balance it, and you can sort of measure what is it that I'm doing. And of course, it's not a static image, so each regression test needs, of course, to reflect the impact and the change that arrives on your system. So this slide tells you a little bit about those different types of regression techniques, their strengths and their weaknesses. And I think one of the key points to talk about when we talk about automating your testing is, of course, to bring you as far as you possibly can towards the very top, where you do not spend your time pondering which things should I test, which things should I skip, because automation is there to make sure that you have that full business continuity verification running continuously on demand as part of your pipeline receiving Dynamics 365. So long story short, automated regression testing, it is essential. If we take those factors, the continuous changes arriving in your production environment and the challenges associated with doing that full 100% regression coverage for each and every one of your releases, and the time that we know that it takes for most of our clients just to do fragments of that, then we're looking into this simple statement. Automated regression testing is essential. You need that to be able to cope with those release cycles. Dynamics 365, as I said, up to 16 alone. I'm betting that's not the only SaaS application that you have running in your infrastructure. Let's say that you have some Salesforce in there, maybe you have some ServiceNow, each with their own life cycle regimes running on the side. So if you turn that year into a wheel with events on it, it's going to be pretty busy with dots where things are changing in your environments, and you need to be ready for each and every one of those events because they represent that crucial part of your end-to-end business journey, your end-to-end business processes, and the way that you can support them. So getting automated testing in there is essential to be able to cope with these cycles, to make sure that you cope with them while not slacking on the coverage of the insight that you get out from testing, because you're testing everything, but obviously also from running and operating your testing organization and regime, be it more effective, be it both in terms of the time that you spend on testing, but certainly also the resources that you need to run this cadence on a yearly basis. Now navigating these different types of service solutions, SaaS-based, coming into your business environment. And of course, a crucial part of that is, being able to know as soon as you possibly can, the minute that preview becomes available into your environments, then you can start testing not a week after, not a couple of weeks after, not scraping towards the go live date where Microsoft will force it into your production environment. You will know in due time and in good time in advance if there's anything to be mindful of by having these automated regression tests running consecutively. So it's a long story short, automation, a fundamental requirement. And also, I think now talking about, how do we then solve the problem? How can we help you using that endorsement, that partnership, that collaboration that we have with Microsoft? How is that helping you to strategically overcome this particular challenge? And I also want to just, shortly kudos to Microsoft, because I think this is fundamentally an expression of them obviously taking quality seriously, but I think more importantly, taking quality seriously beyond themselves. It would be so easy for Microsoft to just go, hey, Microsoft Dynamics is working, so see ya. But that's not what they're doing. They're understanding, they're acknowledging their role in those end-to-end business processes, customer journeys, with their clients, understanding that Dynamics 365 is typically in the middle, at the heart of these things, connected into the other business infrastructures that they have, and they take their share of the responsibility of helping you to maintain that overall quality, that overall knowledge of how your business is doing from an execution perspective, by saying when you test, you need to test across, you need to test broadly. But what's then the challenges for most of organizations, getting to that point where they actually successfully have automation running? Well, one of the challenges in these organizations have lots of testers, and especially so when we look at applications like Dynamics. The clients that I talk to on a daily basis, testing disciplines are, ranging in maturity. But one thing that is almost in common every single time is that the group of people testing it is a band of merry men and women pulled in from the line. Maybe there is a QA organization there. So for every single time a new release is being accepted, people are being pulled in to test, more or less happenstance. But at any given case, typically doing it manually, or if there's automation tools, we see them struggling with some automation capabilities that essentially requires coding skills. And that's what you see right here. Most of the automation tools requires you to work on behalf of IT, you could say, speaking code, because it's seen as a task of making some sort of technical problem go away. But the problem is 8 out of 10 users in testing departments are business users, as I say, borrowed from the line, or just skilled functional testers. Their contribution is not about code. It's about understanding business. It's understanding what does good look like? How do I validate that? How do I make that run as quickly and as efficiently as possible? Selecting the right tests that I need to run, etc., etc. That's their contribution. That's what we hired them to do, not to do coding to make objects pass along on the screen in front of them. So that's why we're saying essentially that approach is broken, and that's I think also why we see, in spite of decades now of automation attempts and efforts across the world, we still see 85% of testing, according to Capgemini, being done fully manually. And that is in spite of 25% of all IT investments is actually going straight into QA. You'd think they'd get some automating up and running for that money, but apparently not. 85% still done fully manual. So again, thanks for Microsoft for doing this, taking that active role in calling out for change. This approach, as I say, it's broken. We need to fix it. And what Microsoft basically, what caught their eye was our approach to run automation. How does that change look like that they're calling for? Well, it looks like this. We are all about business processes. We are all about helping you guys ensure that end-to-end continuity, securing the customer journeys, securing the customer experience. That's essentially what we aim to help you do without compromising on the concepts of quality, far from it. But this is the way that we're doing, using a visualized language coming very much from the domain of business process modeling, business process management. So basically taking that idea of how we express a business process, and this from whiteboards and from Visio or whatever tool it is that you use to document your business processes. So let's take that and let's have automation coming out of that. Now, this is a stylized approach to that. I just thought I'd give you a short, very short 2-minute demo in terms of how does this actually run, then transforming that into actual Leapwork activity. So in this particular short demonstration, I'm just going to run a very short task of creating a contact in CE using our recorder. So as you can see, as you hover above the screen, things are being highlighted for you. What is it that you want to work with? So as a user, you just click and operate the things that you're accustomed to doing. And in this case, well, then, yes, I need to type stuff into the field in order to, of course, operate the flow as such. So here comes in the bare minimum, first name and last name in order for us to create this simple contact in CE. So proceeding ahead to save and close. So we get back to the list, and then we can build the assertion criterion there in terms of obviously check that the character has the contact has successfully been created. Now, here's an example of that visual language. And also a functionality that we might want to use again and again, creating that contact. So I silently or smoothly wrap these building blocks into a shared container, which I call create context. You can see it's converted into one building block. This is now something I can reapply across all of the tests where I need it. And then also removing that hard-coded Bruce Wayne-ness thing from the flow by plugging in this case, an Excel sheet. It could also be a database or an API. But notice how I just, do a selection as I would in Excel itself, connect the data source now configured with the Excel sheet, drag the data into that building block that creates that contact person in CE, and then let's take it out for a spin and see if it works. And I think the important part of that story, because you might think that the main time you spend on automation is building it. But if you look at it from a year or a 2 year long perspective, it's actually keeping it running and keeping it valid, because QA, it's changing all the time. That's the nature of the beast. So making sure that automation is up to speed, well, that's why we provide you with this interface where you have full video recording, you have detail logging. These two are interactively connected with each other so that you can follow the steps and the tracks of the actions taken during automation, and have full assets, full comprehensive documentation of all the steps taken during your automation coming out of this. And on top, of course, represented by exactly where you are in that business process flow. Okay, so that was a short demo. Let's talk a little bit about that promise that Microsoft sort of set out to achieve, to say, well, okay, it's all fine and dandy that I have Dynamics 365 under control, but my business is more than that. My business is running across different types of technologies. Maybe I have Shopify running in my e-commerce, and maybe I have Salesforce running as my CRM. There could all sorts of permutations and variations. So just providing a solution that helps you validate Dynamics 365 does not necessarily help your business process. So that's why we say, your processes goes end to end, and so does your automated test automation need to do. So be mindful of that when looking into the field, because there are so many vendors of test automation out there. But as I say, be mindful. Some of them will be, we call them one-trick ponies, basically. Maybe they only do Dynamics 365. Maybe they only do Salesforce. You need to go much broader than that. And that's, of course, why Microsoft recommended Leapwork, because we do web, we do, of course, Dynamics, Citrix, SAP, mainframes, desktop applications, and so on, and so on, and so on. And from a business perspective, it translates into something like this, right? So you have an end-to-end process. This on the left is actually something coming from one of our clients. That's their actual setup to run their e-commerce platform, beginning with Shopify. Customers are maintained in Salesforce. The whole thing is running out of Dynamics 365 F&O. Then you have some components there to manage logistics and returns. And you can see that testing needs to manage those customer journeys, those processes end to end, in order for them to know that their Dynamics 365 update went as expected. And of course, it scales across the enterprise, also beyond the systems that you may have running in Dynamics, from your back office operations, et cetera, a number of systems in place, and you need a solution that will be able to cater for all of those things. And with that, I think while we get the coffee ready, and Taylor ready to do his thing, let's have a look at the chat and see if there's any questions and answers. Alex, anything popping up?
Awesome, Sune. Thank you for that. Great. So feel free to post any questions you might have in the chat or in the Q&A section. For now, so one of the questions is, do we have any ready-made flows that we can use within D365 to, I'm assuming the question comes from, to help customers get ready? So I can take that. I'll also just mention we have an accelerator pack for D365, F&O specifically. So we have a pre-built framework involving about 40 end-to-end test cases for finance and operations that will help you get started really quickly. And part of that, it's built with best practices in mind. It's customizable. So if you have any sort of custom processes or applications built upon F&O, you can use the framework to customize it to your needs. So that is available. And we are building on top of it as we speak for some of the other D365 applications. Second, can we use RSAT recordings or test cases in Leapwork? I'll also take this, Sune, and I can also hand back for any additional information, but we actually have created an RSAT migration tool. So Microsoft came to us and understanding that a lot of customers have invested in building automation with RSAT, and find it challenging in some instances, especially when we're looking at cross-technology support. So it is very F&O specific. We do have an RSAT migration tool. So you have the ability to take what you have built within RSAT and convert it into Leapwork flows again to help you get started really, really quickly. So that is also available. Question number 3, how do you handle more complex processes where the test user would normally check for specific field content under more complex conditions?
To me.
What are your
Damn.
thoughts? Yes.
I got the hard one. Well, of course, it all depends entirely of the test case, and what's complex in one situation might be super simple in the other one. If you have use cases where you need to validate, let's say that, for instance, your test involves creating an order, and you need to validate that order ID, then fetching an order ID when it is created and validate that later on in the end-to-end journey. Let's say the use case is that I actually created in Shopify and I get that order ID and served to me as a customer in the front end, and double checking that then in the Dynamics backend. Those instances are fully covered. You can either fetch the value from the field, you can store it in a variable and use it later on. We're all built for catering for those data-driven use cases where half of the test scope really is about validating that the output of a given transaction or a process execution is solid, is matching up. Or it could also be, is this order represented correctly on the PDF form or in the mail? All of those use cases are supported fully as part of building that visual process-driven flow. Because from a user's perspective, yes, I start in the e-commerce front end, I go to my Dynamics backend, I open up an email, and we can do all of those things like the user would.
Awesome. Thank you, Sune. Another question, should Microsoft partner companies count on getting licenses on specific terms? So I actually work on the partner team here at Leapwork, and we can definitely follow up. So there's going to be a pop-up shortly from Janelle where you can select if you want us to be in touch with you on any particular topic, this being one of them. So I'm more than happy to follow up and have a discussion around what is involved. We do work with a lot of the Microsoft customer partners in the ecosystem as well. Any other questions here?
Now's the time.
We've got some additional time. Perfect. So do you offer a plan for Microsoft solution partners who want to test Dynamics 365 applications they build for clients? Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned, we work with the Microsoft partner ecosystem very, very closely. So yes, we do have a lot of use cases and instances where we have the partners using Leapwork on behalf of the customer before handing it over or during implementation. So we are really flexible in terms of that. So yes, absolutely. If you want us to follow up and have a conversation, then please feel free just to select yes from the pop-up that is on the screen. Another question, what is the learning curve like? So I'll take part of this and then hand over to you soon as well if you have any more context. So on average, we have between a 30 to 40-day ramp-up period with Leapwork. And really, you've seen kind of as part of the demo, it's a visual approach to automation. So it's something that everyone can understand. And really, Leapwork is built for business users to be able to use. So hence our 30 to 40-day ramp-up period. That's typically how long it takes. Just a quick story on one of our customers here in Europe. They were using a prior tool. They had about 700 test cases that they migrated to Leapwork, not from RSAT, but from another tool. And they were up and running with automation with those 700 and more test cases, increasing the coverage within 60 days. And that was over the summer period where I think a lot of people took holiday too. So We do have a lot of metrics when it comes to ramp up period. So hopefully that answers the question. Another one, can you tell more about the integration slide where data comes from Dynamics? Can we automate that too? For example, that data coming from desktop application through ETL layers. So Sune, I'll give that to you.
Yeah, that is, I think, falling into that category of complex use cases. If you have an ETL layer, I am assuming we're having a database sitting around there somewhere. Plugging into that is easy. There's a building block for plugging into databases, be it Microsoft SQL, be it Oracle or something else. You can do that and attach yourself to that. What we see clients do mostly, though, is simply fetching those values in flight. When we're looking at it from an end-to-end process perspective, again, you're creating an order and you want to validate it in the order email. That is just then fetched as part of executing that end-to-end journey. So there are different ways of catering for those situations of driving data, validating it based on static values, based on values generated on the fly. And I think checking that, would you like to reach out and have a conversation would, I think, provide us with a better slot to go into much more detail on covering that particular topic.
Sure. Awesome. There's a lot of questions around pricing. So if there is questions, if there's questions around pricing, feel free just to say that you want us to reach out and we'll be more than happy to have a conversation. And the reason being, really, it depends on the scope. It depends on what problems we're trying to solve, the scope of testing, applications, etc. So we'll definitely be able to have a conversation if you want some more info. And then we have Hybris, Boomi, a D365 F&O, and we need Leapwork to help full end-to-end automated testing. So that sounds like an ideal use case there in terms of cross-technology support for automation. So we'd love to have a conversation. Sure. So feel free to just hit yes, and we'll
reach out.
We'll definitely.
And I think the coffee's getting
yes.
warm.
Yes,
but before we're getting to that particular topic, you're not quite out of the woods yet, Alex.
Yes.
Let's just do a little wave of the flag for another opportunity to learn more is coming up, Alex.
Absolutely. So thanks for everyone's engagements and questions. We're looking forward to having some follow-up conversations. But if you want to learn more about Leapwork and see the success from one of our customers, Mattress Firm, that'll be on May 23rd at 4 p.m. CET. And we're going to be talking to Tanya Cruz, who is the ERP manager there at Mattress Firm. And she's going to be talking about their experience with Leapwork, working with also a Microsoft partner in the delivery of Leapwork, and really the outcomes that they were able to achieve by introducing Leapwork. So that's going to be really exciting, and you get to hear it not from us, but actually from a customer. So super excited to host that with Tanya. So make sure that you sign up. We'll drop a link into the chat box if you are interested in seeing it. So I think that brings us to the coffee. Thank you so much.
The main attraction, I'm happy to say. Tyler, yes. Welcome, and take us through the great stuff from all things coffee. Take it away.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Like they already mentioned, my name is Tyler. I work as a coffee educator here in Tallahassee, Florida with Lucky Goat Coffee. And I get to talk with you all this morning about everybody's favorite drink, favorite thing to have first thing in the morning, coffee. We're going to learn a little bit about the history and the science behind coffee and how we get something from a cherry on a tree to our favorite drink in the morning that we drink globally. So starting here in the green coffee production, we're going to learn a little bit about the history of it. Natively, coffee is a plant that was found on the eastern side of Africa in the Ethiopian region. It was found around 850. And the legend behind it is that there was a goat herder who was bringing his goats through Africa, and they found this cherry tree and they decided to have a little snack from there, eat the cherries. And then the herder found that the goats had a lot more energy. They're moving a little bit quicker than him. And he brought this plant back to where he was traveling to. And they started doing a little bit of testing and cooking with it, making drinks with it. And somewhere along the line, after years of history and testing, we have the cup that we drink today. So that's the popular legend behind the story. That's where my company gets its name, Lucky Goat, because it's thanks to those lucky goats that we have this drink that we get to enjoy today. So we move ahead to the next slide. We will see our coffee map. So these are all the regions where coffee is grown around the world. You'll notice that it's typically around a single band around the equator. That's because our coffee likes a specific climate. It performs warmer climates that are wet, also climates that have a little bit higher elevation. You'll notice specialty coffee shops really highlight elevation in the coffees that they sell. It's due to those environments that kind of help feed the coffee bean the flavors of the fruit. So when you're at a higher elevation, there's a little bit less oxygen up there, so the fruit ripens a little slower. That gives the bean time to absorb all the flavors that are in those fruits and kind of give it a little bit more complex, richer notes. You'll see the areas that are high coffee producers each year is Brazil being one of the largest. They export a ton of coffee, being in that warm rainforest-like environment, closely followed by areas in Southeast Asia. Vietnam is a huge producer, as well as Indonesia. And you see represented by all these circles here, the metric tons per year they export of coffee. It's a huge export for a lot of these countries. There are countries in Africa that have government assistance to provide this exported good to kind of help the country economy out. And it's a major driver for a lot of these places. On the next slide, we'll see the different kind of species that we have of coffee. So there's a ton of different coffee plants that grow, over 120 different types of coffee trees. Mainly, you will only see two main types. You have your Arabica coffee, which is very, very common. It's about 60% of our global composition of coffee. This plant tends to produce really high quality coffees, but the payoff for that is it's a little bit harder to maintain from the farmer's perspective. So the farmers do typically put a little bit more labor, a little bit more work into maintaining these plants, keeping them healthy, having them survive through tougher climate seasons or other different complexities that they may face. But it really pays off with a higher quality with a better taste. Specialty coffee shops will typically only source these types of beans. On the other hand of that, you have your Robusta coffee, which is also very, very common and very popular. It's about 40% of the global production. It's a little bit cheaper of a plant to grow. It's a little bit more robust, hence the name, and it is very resistant to disease, and it does have a little bit of a higher caffeine payoff. But then on the flip side of that, its tasting notes can't be as complex as the Arabica plant produces. So it's those different trade-offs that farmers have to decide on what their main goal is with their crop that they're producing, or whoever their importers or exporters are, what kind of things they're wanting to sell for the particular season that they have. So in the next slide, we see our cultivation. So we learn a little bit more about how the farmers grow these plants. So taking it from the seed to the harvest is about 4 years. You take the little coffee beans that we're all very familiar with. They look a little bit different in the planting stage, but they're often frequently planted in a nursery or a little bit safer environment to get a good start to them. And then they're moved out to the fields where they continue their growth. The coffee plants don't have an extremely high yield. One singular coffee tree would take about 4 years to make one full 12-ounce size bag of coffee. So the farmers put a ton of work into these plants to make sure that they're at their best and at their peak. Like I mentioned earlier, with the different regions that coffees grow in, coffees that are grown in high elevations that have volcanic activity produce some really, really unique coffees due to the nutrients that are found in the soil due to the volcanic activity. Some of those regions can actually get 2 different harvest seasons per year. When it comes to the harvest, on the next slide, you'll see that they will typically have a white flower that blooms. It's a really, really gorgeous plant when the flowers are blooming and you start to see these green and red cherries pop up. It's about a 9-month period from flowering to harvest. But like I said, with those volcanic regions, sometimes they can get an extra harvest out of it. That's in your areas like in Ethiopia, they have that, as well as Peru is a large one as well. When they go to pick these plants, you have two different options similar to the two different species that the farmers could grow. You have machine harvesting, which is the simplest and most efficient way to do it, in which they have different type of machines that'll go through the crop lines and either shake the trees or have some method of harvesting the cherries off of them, and it can really quickly gather a lot of the product. However, on the flip side of that, we see that it'll sometimes get some imperfections in there that'll take a little bit extra labor on the back end of sorting. You might get some cherries that are not fully ripe. You get some imperfections or contaminants from diseased plants or even insects that have come into contact with the cherries. So it's a little bit less uniform. And on the other hand of that, you have your hand picking, which is a little bit, of course, labor intensive and a little bit more cost intensive, but it allows these producers to pick cherries that are at the perfect ripe level to give you a very clean cup of coffee that has these really, really bright and crisp notes. And then after we have the cherries harvested and we pick them off the trees, it comes time for processing. Processing plays a very big role in the type of coffee that you have. You'll see specialty shops highlight the process a lot because it lends a ton of information to the flavor profile that you'll have. Once processed, it's getting the bean out. There's two different common ways to do that. As we grow in the coffee industry and coffee becomes ever more popular, there are some new, little bit quirky different ways that they are doing this to kind of get the flavor out. And they're adding different unique things into it. But for today, we'll talk about these two main ones that we'll see. You have the natural process and then the wash process. A natural process kind of lends itself to its name. They will pick the cherries and they'll lay them out on these beds. You can kind of see an example of one of the beds in that top right corner. They're kind of like a mesh bed that the cherries are then placed on, and then they're elevated. That way they can get full air circulation. So what's going to happen then is that cherry is going to fully dry out around the seed, and then that's going to allow more of that coffee flavor or the fruity, sweeter flavors to get into the bean. So if you see coffees a lot, frequently they are either fruity, sweet, sometimes citrusy coffees. And then a lot of times you also have darker, more robust coffees that are a little bit more chocolatey, a little bit more nutty in flavor. Your natural process, because they sit around that fruit for extended periods of time, those are going to be your coffees that are a little bit sweeter, have those berry notes in them, have those strong floral, fruity flavors that lends itself from the plant. On the opposite side of that, you have your wash process, in which case that they wash all the fruit off of the cherry seed. There'll be a little bit of that slimy pectin or mucilage around it, which can also help add to the flavor profile, and that'll dry on the outside of it before it goes to roasting. So it does still get a lot of influence from the plant that it's on. In the next slide, after these have all been processed and then dried out, we go into our grading. So this is kind of where the price breakdowns begin in the coffee industry. So you have these folk who are called Q graders. They have extremely refined palates. They are the coffee snobs, essentially, of the industry, but they get to decide how good a coffee is or is not. When you look at specialty shops, such as the one that you guys will be receiving coffee from and the shop that I work at as well, we typically do not buy anything that's under an 80 on this 100-point scale. We want things that are real high quality. We want to bring the best that we can offer for folks. And the Q grading is done based on the size of the bean, the appearance of it, if there's a lot of imperfections in the lot, if there is any signs of disease in the plant, as well as, of course, the taste of the coffee. So this kind of is where the price setting starts in a lot of coffee, on how the green coffee is sold, and then you get the added factors of the export costs, the import costs, the roasters, and so on and so forth. So sometimes when we see that expensive cup of coffee, there's a lot of people in the supply chain before it that the money does break down into. So after that, we get the coffee sent from the ports out to the roasters. And then in the roasting section on this slide, we see a picture of a coffee roaster. These are very, very large machines that our sole purpose is to heat coffee pretty quickly. Roasting is a huge science of coffee that is frequently overlooked, and that's where a lot of flavor profiling comes from. So the coffee plant itself, once it's sent out, will have an intention of what kind of flavors that it could be pulled out of it. But the roaster can kind of highlight those flavors depending on the roast level. So whether they make the green coffee into a light roast or into a dark roast, that's a lot of the roaster's choice and what they sell. So two different shops can buy the same lot of coffee, but they can have very different flavor notes stand out depending on how the roaster roasts that coffee. It's about a 12-minute process. It goes really, really hot, really, really quick. The roasters are looking at graphs at how quickly they're warming up, when the first crack will happen, which is when the bean will have a slight crack in it and will release built up gases and moisture that's left over. And that's usually a sign on how much further they need to take that roast level into. There's a common belief that darker coffee is a little bit stronger. It's not all that true. The longer something will sit in the roaster, a little bit more of that caffeine burns off. So lighter roast coffees do typically have just a smidge more caffeine in it than the darker roast counterparts. So speaking of caffeine, let's talk about extraction. So extraction, or also known as brewing, typically that is defined by applying water and force such as temperature and or pressure to pull out certain flavors that you have in your coffee. So on that next slide, you'll see different flavors that we can pull out of our coffee. When you are brewing coffee, you're taking the dissolvable parts of your beans and then adding that to your water. Coffee and water are the two ingredients you have in it, so using high quality aspects of both really helps. We have those water solubles that are coming from the dry grinds to produce your different kind of flavor notes that you'll have. Each of these little things that we see listed here all play different parts into the flavor, into the body of the coffee. And then different brewing variables can change as well to kind of play in how flavor notes are coming across in your coffee. So let's take a look at brewing at home, what everybody really wants to know. How do I make my cup of coffee at home taste like the one I get from the shop down the street? There's a ton of brewing recipes and there's a ton of ratios, and everybody has their own preferences. But there are a couple key principles that'll help you kind of fine tailor your cup to exactly how you like to make it. Whether you're making your coffee in a filter drip coffee machine, whether you're doing a pour over or a French press or espresso, they all typically follow a guideline of ratios. So it's basically how much water you're putting with how much dry coffee grounds you have to get your final product. So we look at an example of making a pour over coffee or a French press coffee. Typically, you want to follow about a 1:16 ratio. So for every 1 gram of coffee that you have, you want to have about 16 grams of water to that. So following that up and scaling it how you'd like to get your final product cup is a great way to figure out your strength and your flavor profiles that you have as well. Now for espresso, which is a little bit more concentrated as we're familiar with, that follows a 1:2 ratio. So it's a lot stronger, a lot more concentrated. The common recipe that you see on a lot of espresso is around 16 to 20 grams of espresso to pull out around 30 grams of a final product, which is equivalent to your standard double shot. And different factors like the grind size are large in pulling out those flavors. So if you have a cup of coffee or if you go to somewhere and you get an espresso and you find that it's a little bit bitter, it's a little bit too sour, the acid is really strong in it, typically that's due to grind size and how much surface area you're exposing to your water. So when you have a finer grind size, it'll compact in that espresso very, very densely, and the water is going to spend a ton of time with those beans as it moves through it. So it's over extracting. It's pulling out way too many flavors from that. And then you're going to get that converse smoky and ashy or burnt coffee taste. So if you make a coarser grind size, you ask your barista to grind your stuff a little bit coarser. If you're doing home grinding, which is excellent, grinding a little bit coarser will allow you to have that water move through it a little bit more freely, and therefore you can lean more into your other side of the spectrum. So whether you're more into the bitter, snappy, and bright coffee, or more so of the smoky, deep, chocolatey notes, it depends on how much time your water is interacting with that cup of coffee that you have. So there is a ton of science. There is a ton of variable that goes into it. Coffee is so customizable. Frequently when I find people that say that they're not that into coffee, I say you just haven't found the right one yet, because it's just such a vast industry and such a fun hobby to really get into. I never planned to work in coffee, but I was drinking it every day. I enjoyed the work that I did. It became a hobby of mine, and now it's something that I do 40 hours a week, and I love it. So hopefully with some of this history and the science of the coffee, we can further understand and enjoy that daily cup we have each and every day. So I know with that, I think we do have some Q&A opportunity.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Tyler, for that amazing presentation. I think we all just learned a ton of new things about coffee. And we do have questions, so feel free to type those into the chat or put them into Q&A. Our first question is, can you track your coffee back to which field produced it?
Frequently in a lot of specialty circumstances, you absolutely can. I believe the bag that you guys will be receiving from the Coffee Collective, that is a Colombian coffee, and it does usually highlight either the region or sometimes even the specific farm that you're pulling from. The coffee that you guys are receiving, I think it does highlight the farm on the front of the bag, and you can quickly search that up and find a pin exactly where in Colombia this coffee was grown. A lot of times, coffee shops will even partner very closely with certain farmers to help kind of cut out some middleman in supply chain and help these farmers and these laborers receive better profits on their end of the spectrum too. So it's such a heavy labor intensive work.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Tyler. Everyone will receive gourmet artisan roasted Colombian coffee from the Coffee Collective with aromas of mandarin, milk chocolate, and orange blossom with a clean, mild, and elegant taste. So that is the official description for all of the coffee connoisseurs out there. So look for that at your addresses that you filled in when you registered in approximately 2 weeks, depending on postal times. But yes, so other questions, feel free to type them into the chat. I know, Tyler, we're moving into warmer months. So is cold coffee more popular as the temperatures heat up?
Yeah, here stateside, especially in Florida, cold coffee is almost the dominant year round for us. We get maybe 2 months of the year that we can enjoy hot coffee without sweating too much. But I think cold coffee is definitely the new trend. We see with popular commercial trains, they drive a lot of these leading factors of what's trending and what's on the rise. And dressing up iced coffee is the newest thing on the horizon. So adding in cold foams, which kind of simulate your latte texture of that frothy, creamy milk applied to a cold process, because it's usually only done with steaming the milk, and then the hot milk with the cold coffee doesn't typically mix well. So flavored cold foams and finding unique ways to dress up your cup to have something a little different than what you're used to each and every day is definitely the trend that we see. Like I mentioned earlier, there's some different processing methods that are really popular. Fermenting the coffee when they dry out from the seed is something that is new and something that I've tried recently that is really, really interesting. So once they get the seed removed from the coffee cherry, they'll vacuum seal it. Sometimes they'll add in some orange peel or maybe mint leaves or something like that. And then they get to sit sealed off from oxygen and ferment just a little bit with these added in ingredients to kind of pull out some different or unique notes or added notes to your final product.
Fantastic. And what is the world's most popular way to brew coffee?
I would say globally, probably espresso. You see that concentrated shot of espresso tracing back very, very far. You see it similarly in Turkish coffee, where they use the warm sands to brew their coffee. Or I would also say the French press is also extremely, extremely popular. Having a simple method to brew your coffee in the morning by dumping your grounds in there, having the hot water, letting it sit for a few minutes, coming it back, and being able to enjoy that freshly brewed cup of coffee is really, really popular.
Excellent. And where should you store your coffee?
That's a great question. There's a common myth that we hear a lot that people say your coffee is best kept in the freezer. That is not the case. Some of your beans may freeze. There is a slight moisture content still in your beans. And the freezing and thawing usually lend it to your flavor notes either being weaker or disappearing in taste. I say the best way to store your coffee is to purchase it whole bean, grind it fresh, and then when you're not actively using your coffee, keeping it in some kind of vacuum sealed container to keep it away from oxygen. Coffee beans from their roast through consumption will slowly let off some gases. Around the first 48 hours after the roast, the coffee should rest. So you want a lot of those gases to burn off, but a lot of them can kind of help add to your cup. There's certain oils in there that are really important for your notes, as well as the gases can kind of play a role in your crema of the coffee if you're looking at espresso. So keeping them in a vacuum sealed container, so whether that looks like a plastic Tupperware with a really good lid or some of these fancier vacuum seal containers that have a plunger for you to physically press out the air. Those are really great ways to keep your coffee as fresh as you can.
Excellent. And you mentioned a grinder. Is there a best way to grind your coffee?
Absolutely, yes. So there are a few different grinders on the market. They can get very expensive very quickly, as a lot of coffee equipment can. But looking for a burr grinder as opposed to a blade grinder is a really great step in the right direction. Blade grinders kind of just spin and hack your beans until they are just smaller than they were. Burr grinders allow you to have a proper uniform texture. So it allows each of your grinds to kind of get the same level of extraction. So that way you're not over extracting certain areas of your coffee and getting that smoky burnt flavor, or under extracting and getting that sour bitter flavor in other areas. Burr grinders do a great job of providing really uniform texture. You can find mechanical ones that will grind for you. The Encore Baratza grinder is a really great intro mechanical burr grinder. That's not too pricey, but they also make really great hand grinders. So if you travel a lot and you love having your coffee the way you make it, they're great to kind of throw in a carry-on, and you can have your cup of coffee with a small morning workout pretty quickly.
That is for the ultimate coffee drinker to bring a hand grinder and a carry-on luggage. That's awesome. I love it. Um, is there a popular, I guess, a drink? It's drinks as we move into the warmer weather. What is the most popular drink, maybe in Europe versus the US?
That's a great question. I'm not too sure what's trending over in Europe. I mean, maybe I could get some insight from you all as well. But I know in the US, we are loving seeing sweet coffee drinks that are have unique flavor profiles. Something that is currently trending that I've seen at least stateside, and I believe this is happening over in Europe as well. One of the flavors of the year that we received from one of our flavor providers is ube. So it's that purple yam flavor. And then typically they'll add a little bit of vanilla or fig to it to kind of help brighten the flavor notes already present. But those unique flavors are really on the trend, something that people typically don't get, but they can experience in something as they're accustomed to, like their morning cup of coffee.
Excellent. Well, I know when I was in Europe, I did see some pistachio, actually quite a bit of pistachio and some lavender as well. But for those in our session, if you have particular coffee drinks that are trending or that you love, feel free to type those into the chat. Always fun to see. And Tyler, one thing, water, because that's a large component of our coffee. Can your water change the flavor of your coffee?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because your coffee is typically comprised of just your grinds and your water. Your water plays a huge part of it. Water typically accounts for around 90% of your final cup, with the 10% ish being your solids that come out of your coffee grinds. Having good water to start with is really important. For the cafes that we have here in Tallahassee, one of our largest regular maintenance costs is replacing our water filters. So you can, using a standard at home, using any kind of Brita or standard home water filter will be plenty. But you can also have too clean of water. So, for example, distilled water, you've removed too many of those minerals, too many of the stuff that's naturally occurring that can really help complement your flavor profile in your water, or in your final cup of coffee, I should say. So using like a good water is really, really important. Sometimes we see that if you do like distilled water, there are companies that make coffee mineral packs that you can add to your water and kind of dissolve into it to add some of the flavors or minerals that are in the water that could really complement your final cup of coffee.
Excellent. And what would be a simple way to brew iced coffee?
I think cold brew coffee is the easiest way to go, and one of the best ways to go. There's a lot of confusion about different types of iced coffee. Iced coffee, as most people know it, is coffee that is brewed normally as a drip, and then slowly brought down temperature over time. Cold brew, on the other hand, is something that you brew at room temperature and can be very easily done. If you have a cheesecloth or a fine mesh strainer and a mason jar on hand, you could have cold brew tomorrow morning. So throwing some very coarse grind coffee in with some room temperature water, and following a ratio of about 1 to 18 for that. And then letting it sit room temperature, even on your countertop overnight, giving it a slight agitation to make sure all your grounds are evenly wet, and then straining out in the morning, chilling it in your fridge. And that's how I frequently make my coffee at home. I have a large mason jar and I have a cheesecloth and a strainer. And I set it out at night when I'm running low. And then the next day when I get to it, I'll strain it out, store it in my fridge. Super simple, great way to have a nice clean cup of coffee.
Wonderful. And everyone, feel free to put any last minute questions into the chat, and we are more than happy to answer them. And Tyler, where are the most popular regions from a coffee perspective? And does it matter what type of coffee you use for cold brew or hot coffee or espresso, or can you mix and match any coffee with any type of preparation?
Yeah, so frequently when you're buying coffee, you'll see some intention set with the roaster that makes the coffee. So, for example, you might see espresso beans. Espresso beans aren't beans that are any different from any other coffee. Typically, the roaster that is making this will have the intention of it to be used under an espresso brewing method. So, you having that very concentrated shot of coffee under pressure brewing with high heat as well. So having that available definitely makes a bit of a difference in your final cup of coffee. For cold brew, using darker roasted coffees tend to work a little bit better because you're not adding that heat element with your water that you're brewing. Having something that has a little bit stronger profile at baseline helps to have a better cup of cold brew at the end of it. And then after that, it just really does come down to taste preferences. I love for hot coffee, I love a light roast coffee, something very easy and approachable for my morning cup, something a little bit bright to help me wake up along with the caffeine content. Is something that I personally really, really enjoy for your hot filter coffee.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We are at the top of the hour, and we look forward to seeing you all at a future Leapwork session. And feel free to join us next week for Alexander Cocktail and our Mattress Firm webinar. And just a reminder to everyone, you all will receive artisan roasted Colombian coffee from the Coffee Collective. So we hope you all enjoy that. But thank you for joining us today. Everyone have an amazing day, and we appreciate your time. Thank you. And soon, Alexandra, Jen, over to you for any closing comments.
Well, not much other than, as always, super interesting conversation on coffee, and the amount of stuff that you don't know about this brown beverage is amazing. So thanks, Tyler.
True. Thanks, Tyler. And thanks everyone for joining. Looking forward to having some follow-up conversations.
Yes, and thanks, Suna and Alexandra and Tyler, for your amazing presentations. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the week, everyone, and see you at a future session. Take care. Bye.
Thanks.